want to take this opportunity to say a big thank you, not only to John for his continued partnership, but our team. Jen and Dina are here, and they've been, great at just putting all the details together, making sure the technology works, and then, of course, getting you all the recording afterwards. And then I just want to take this time to thank all the board members who have taken this time to, really spend some time together in fellowship with each other to learn about what's best for heads, what's best for schools, and how you can partner with each other to make our schools successful. We know it's not an easy job. You don't get paid for it, and we appreciate your volunteerism and your support. So we are in our second session. This is the role of the head of school sustainable, and how to help heads renew their focus and commitment. If you had a chance to join us for the first session with John, you heard me talk a little bit about his background. If not, please go back to that recording. I am going to say a little bit of an intro. John is the senior partner at Littleford and Associates. He served not just as a teacher, but a trustee and head of school during his 25-year independent school career. And since 1994, he's been a full-time consultant to over 3,000 independent and international schools, as well as corporations, foundations, universities, and a range of medical and arts-oriented nonprofit organizations. Mr. Littleford's expertise includes governance, strategic planning, executive and faculty compensation and evaluation, executive searches, marketing, fundraising, managing change, crisis management, school climate, organizational review, institutional and financial audits, and team building. He's been a speaker, a presenter, a workshop leader, a keynote on several continents, and he's the author of a highly popular book on faculty salary systems in independent schools. His firm's newsletter goes out about 5 times a year to over 25,000 trustees and school leaders, and it's circulated and read worldwide. So if you're not subscribed to that, I suggest you do that. It's always a good read with great information. So again, thank you all for coming. We will utilize the chat feature as well throughout if you have questions. Some of you have submitted questions in advance, and I know John is prepared to weave those into his presentation today. So without further ado, let's welcome John Littleford back to the Zoom stage.
Thank you very, very much, Yanni, and thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Dina, the wonderful office staff of ADVIS. I might just put a plug in for the third and last session of this series coming up, which is on head compensation. We, as a firm, work with over 7,000 schools worldwide on head of school compensation. We are retained only by boards, not heads, but we generally come to the attention of boards through heads. That session that's coming up will be as broad and as detailed as we can make it in an hour. I forget what the date is, but I'm sure Jennifer will remind you. So today is about renewal of heads. I'm going to try to get my PowerPoint to show up properly here. So we will make this effort. Okay. This is called the case for renewal, guys. Sometimes we need it. What are the signs of and the reasons for stress among heads? Well, a number are contemplating early retirement. Actually, I know quite a few who have gone into consulting earlier than they had planned. They're not taking time off, possibly when they should. There's certainly evidence I'm hearing from boards that their heads seem to be more tense and have less of a sense of humor. Heads are feeling more isolated and maybe withdrawing more. This, again, is what I'm hearing from boards. They are feeling under attack by one or more constituent groups, obviously more so in the last 3 years during the pandemic, but this is not over. They are feeling family stress, and there are sometimes medical related issues going on in the family because of the stress that the head of school brings home. Maybe the leadership team is weaker or thin, which may be adding to the head's burden, and maybe it may not be as entirely loyal as the head may expect. And then there, of course, is the post-pandemic parental demands and separation anxieties and teacher expectations for higher salaries, and parents wanting more influence at the board level and boards being more influenced by those demands. One way to remedy the situation is mini or longer sabbaticals. Now, I want you to think about this. I went to Chat GPT today, which I'm finding a fascinating tool. And I simply said, why is it independent school heads may not want sabbaticals? That was the question for Chat GPT. And here's what it said. Heads of independent schools may not want to take sabbaticals for a variety of reasons, such as concerns about the cost, finding temporary replacement leadership, or the potential disruption to the school community. Sabbaticals often require the head of school to be away from the school for an extended period of time, which can be difficult to manage and plan for. This can also be an added expense for the school, as they may need to pay for a substitute head during the sabbatical period. This is, again, all Chat GPT. Additionally, the head of school is often a critical leader within the school community, and his or her absence can lead to potential disruption in the school's operations. This can be especially concerning for independent schools, which are often smaller and more closely knit than larger schools. It's also possible that the head of school may simply prefer to focus their time and energy on the ongoing operations of the school, rather than taking a break for a sabbatical. In any case, sabbaticals are a personal decision, and each head of an independent school may have different priorities and considerations that influence their stance on sabbaticals. So that's Chat GPT. Not a bad answer, but it left out one crucial reasons heads may be concerned about taking a break. So first of all, if you're thinking about a sabbatical, or the board is thinking about a sabbatical for the head, hopefully it's the head who initiates it, there needs to be some planning ahead for the head's absence. How do you choose a person to lead in his or her absence? What are the terms and conditions of the sabbatical? Expenses paid or not paid, expectations upon return, such as how long the head may stay after the sabbatical, or perhaps it's focused professional development. Should there be expectations about what the head brings back to the school at the end of a sabbatical in terms of additional credentials or research? And sometimes the sabbatical is just a much needed break. So for those of you who are interested in the concept, and I think you should be, I got a letter last night, rather an email, from a head of school who wanted to be on the screen today, but cannot because of issues of time, but also is not a member of ADVIS. But here's what the person says. I know you have a session today on head renewal. I cannot attend. I'm not a member of ADVIS anyway, but I did have these points and questions in case you have time to respond. Number one, I need a break. I'm tired. Of course, I cannot admit this to my chair, much less to my full board. Frankly, and don't mention my name, please, but I find the idea a bit risky. If the board suggested I take a sabbatical, I might wonder whether it meant they were thinking of replacing me. If the short-term replacement is an internal candidate, i.e. an administrator of mine, and a favorite of the board, which in my case actually is true and with good reason, is that not almost naive of me to leave the scene? Question mark. How can the board justify the time and money to have me go away other than for a very short period of time? Would there not be requirements to stay for X number of years once I returned? And how would that be enforced? Not that I would ever think of not honoring my commitment. What would the compensation aspect be related to a sabbatical? Full pay and benefits or something less? And how long could I or should I be taking off to make the process meaningful, but again, not risky to me or the school? Do you have some ideas of great learning opportunities that would enhance my skill set, but also allow me to take my family someplace to get away physically and emotionally and do something entirely different? And I do have a house on campus, so what might be the housing implications for that? The last 3 years have been draining emotionally, and I know I need a break for my health, for my family, and frankly, I'm reluctant to say, is also for my ability to be the person I need to be to lead this school. I have a supportive board and a very supportive chair, but I know things can turn on a dime. So I'm always wary of asking for a sabbatical, even though, frankly, I need one. I thought that was pretty frank, and obviously I can't use the person's name, but I would like you all to think about that concept, if not a sabbatical, time away or professional development that is a source of renewal. And I want to give you my example. I was head of Breck School for 12 years in Minneapolis. After 8 years, we had moved our campus from one site to another, totally moved the school 9 miles away. from its previous geographic center. The old campus had 400 kids approximately when we left. And 6 years later on the new campus, we had 1,500 kids. I was so tired after 8 years, I was going to quit the profession. But I went to my board chair to talk it through. And my board chair, who was an alum and a parent and a CEO of his own company, said, why don't you apply for a sabbatical? I think we have a provision where after 7 years, you can at least apply. And I said to him, yes, but the policy says 1 year at half pay. And I frankly couldn't go away and do that. And he said, well, why don't you think of an idea that you might think the board would support? Why don't you write the proposal? And why don't you see if there's an area foundation that might in fact pay the other half of your sabbatical if the reason for going were substantial enough? So I did. I proposed a sabbatical to go back to the Harvard Graduate School of Education to get what's called a certificate of advanced study. I already had a master's from Harvard in Chinese and Russian, but I hadn't been to the ed school. And this was a perfect program. And I also had a communication from NAIS that while I was on that sabbatical, would I be interested in writing and researching a book on teacher compensation in independent schools in the United States. That was a fascinating opportunity. So I got accepted by the Harvard Ed School. I got half of my salary and all of my benefits from my school. I got the other half of my salary from a local foundation. And that, by the way, that part of my compensation was tax-free under US law. The school paid for my housing at Harvard, which was on the Divinity School campus in the house of a gentleman who himself was taking a sabbatical. It was right next door to the house of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Beautiful home. I had 2 parking places very close to Harvard Square. That alone was worth a fortune. Ended up buying a piece of land on Cape Cod, having visited here during that visit. I visited 200 schools during that year, researching the book on faculty compensation. The person who took over the school for a full year as acting head was the assistant head, wonderful woman named Catherine Harper. And I did come back to the school only twice, very briefly, a day or two during that entire year. I noticed that the head's parking space was empty and the head's office was empty because Catherine had made sure each time I came back, I felt that it was my office. And I did come back a year later and I stayed for 3 more years as per the agreement. And it was life-changing. I think it was life-changing for me. I think it was life-changing for the school. Catherine became a superstar on many levels because of the work that she began to do in my absence. So for me, I thought there must be a lot of people doing this. But as far as I could tell, I was the only head in the United States at that point in time who was offered and given a full year sabbatical from which I was allowed to return, as opposed to a sabbatical, which is an end of career assignment, as opposed to a sabbatical, which is an invitation from the board to leave. This was a true sabbatical. And of course, for the board chairs in the room, some of you have heard the story, but when my board chair there, some years later, passed away in an auto accident, very unfortunately, his widow and I had a conversation about how much we loved him. And she told me that she was going to tell me something she could not have told me had he still been alive. And I asked, what was that? And she said, well, you know, that grant you got from the foundation to support your sabbatical. I said, yes. She said, that came from my husband. I said, I thought it came from the foundation. It did. He gave it to the foundation explicitly to support your sabbatical. I won't tell you how much money that was, but that was a good bit of money. And I've always thought, wow, to have a chair that would do that would support the sabbatical for a head they valued, but who was tired, and had the opportunity to come back and launch the first ever endowment campaign we really had, and who personally committed resources. Now, I'm not suggesting this is what every chair on of the board on the screen should be doing today, but let's at least think about the needed breaks that heads have. Many heads today are taking mini sabbaticals. It might be a month here, a month there. Sometimes it's 3 months of the summer and the 3 months of early fall. Sometimes it's the second semester. So it may not be a full year, but heads are finding they need and want that time away. And then they get into all kinds of practical questions, like who's going to cover while I'm gone? What's the compensation for that person? What are my obligations and liabilities? Does it have to be work where I research something and come back and share? Or can it just be a needed break for me and my family? There's all kinds of examples I could give you. One head of a boys' school in the US took a sabbatical for 6 months from, I think it was March through September, and went to Australia with his entire family at school expense to research boys' education in Australia and how they handle it compared to the US. Just one example. Okay, other ways to give the head a break. A travel learning experience that may include the family with the expectation that the head will provide feedback and information back to the school and the school community. It could be professional development, such as fellowships and advanced certificates at universities for CEOs of nonprofits. I've got a very good client school head who was the head of a school in New York City, who went to a Kennedy School of Government at Harvard session, which was, I think, several days of seminars, but the real power of it was the CEOs of the nonprofits who were a part of the experience stayed in contact on a regular basis for online experiences going forward. And this, I think, has been several years ago now, and this is continuing. It might be something as simple as a club membership for wellness. You know, could be a golf club if the person plays golf, could be a tennis club, just could be a club with a swimming pool, something where the family of the head, not just the head, has a chance to become more relaxed. Wellness obviously affects everybody in schools, and everybody's been under mental stress, but that's an important thing for the head of school as well. What about executive coaching, paid by the school, but with a coach of the head's choosing? This might be an executive coach that focuses on skills, or it could be focusing on, frankly, how that head can take better care of himself or herself in such a high stress position. What can the board and board chairs who are nurturers prevent? How can you help prevent burnout? The board chair or members of the head support and evaluation committee do regular check-ins to see how the head is doing. This does not mean asking faculty and parents how the head is doing. Do the board members even know the name of the spouse or partner? When I'm doing governance workshops, I'll just ask how many of the board members know the name of the head spouse or partner, if there are any, and if there are children, what are their names and what are they doing? What are they doing? Many can't answer that question. Does the board know the names of the head's children and grades? Surprisingly, many do not. Does the chair or the members of the board and the head support and evaluation committee know how the head and his or her family feel about their housing situation, whether it's school-owned on campus, school-owned off campus, or not school-owned at all? Many heads do not want to appear to be complaining about this issue, but in our work with head compensation with boards, it is often a source of discontent. A strong head support and evaluation committee can also be supportive of the head to reduce stress. The head evaluation should be annual, should engage the full board, should be supportive and not punitive, should come up with mutually agreed upon and manageable goals, no more than 3 to 5. And by the way, if it's a new head of school, the only goal should be to meet people and get to know the culture. Don't make change. That ought to be the first year goal. Goals might be measurable, but not about style. They should be a safe process, for head evaluation. I'd avoid 360 in certain specific circumstances. There are risks to executive session and town meetings to the head of school, and I would definitely not use that as part of head evaluation process. And chairs who are public supporters and as needed private critics. That head chair partnership, talk about mental stress. If the head chair partnership is working, the chair is the biggest public supporter, but as needed, the most honest private critic, so that the head knows what kind of real insights they're getting about their leadership from their boss. There are good and poor practices in head evaluation. If you're talking about head stress level in the whole area of rejuvenation, Be careful how you handle that entire theme. Head compensation. It's usually initiated and undertaken by the board with or without outside consultation. It's actually a law. There's a law called the Intermediate Sanctions Act that was passed in 1996 that requires all nonprofits of all the 501c3s to annually have a committee that undertakes a formal evaluation of the CEO's compensation. You don't have to hire a consultant and you don't have to pay the person more, but you are supposed to go through the protocols of that process. And we will talk about that at more length in the session we have coming up on head compensation. The compensation should be competitive and fair and benchmarked appropriately. Compensation should meet 3 requirements. It should be fair and realistically meet the head's needs. It should meet the board's needs and the budget's limitations, but it also should be able to be defended in the public domain when the 990s go public, or if you're a church-related school, when gossip goes public. Compensation should be tailored to the unique needs of the head and his or her family, but within the school's budget. And I will just tell you this, that housing is a crucial part, children's tuition is a crucial part, and increasingly, and something we'll talk about again soon, deferred compensation is a huge part today. It was not 10 years ago, but it is now. It has to fall within what the law calls the safe harbors limits under this law called the Intermediate Sanctions Act. This review should occur regularly. You can develop built-in deferred compensation plans. I'm not talking about the 403B. That's a qualified plan. I'm talking about what's called non-qualified deferred compensation plans. If you're using a formal survey to benchmark compensation for heads of schools, whether it's DAZZLE or whether it's the 990s or whatever, it's not always accurate and it's often misunderstood. So again, that's the focus of our next session with ADVIS. Contract renewal. Often the head is the last one to have his or her contract renewed. I just got a call 3 days ago from a board chair of a very prominent school in this country. Rush to get the head's compensation and benchmarked and renewed as soon as possible because the head's contract is up this July. Well, here we are in February, it's up this July. And my point was, what if there's lack of agreement on the change figures in the compensation package? Neither one of you have any time to conduct a search with 4 months left before the contract is up. So how did you get to this point? And the chair just admitted we'd overlooked it in moving from one chair to the next. So the appropriate contract language should be in that contract. And the most important language in the contract is in respect to termination. Termination with cause and termination without cause. The definition of cause is crucial. And the definition of what the school pays if you're terminated without cause is crucial. In the United States today, probably 90% of all of our contracts with school heads are 3 to 4 years. Most of them are 3 years, and they are evergreen, which means if somebody forgets to renew them, they renew automatically for another year. Heads contracts for 4 or 5 or more years are more rare, but not if the head's been with you for a while and the partnership is strong. The head support committee ought to oversee the head's evaluation, the compensation review, and the contract extension. Also, you want to manage board and head expectations in this process. It ought to be a marriage renewal process, not a process of stress. Good board governance supports the head and certainly reduces stress. Ensure appropriate but not threatening succession planning. Most independent school boards want to know there is a succession plan if something happens to the head. Most heads read that a little suspiciously as, I know I'm supposed to provide good succession planning, but I don't want to provide it too well. I mean, nobody would say that publicly, but there's always that threat because remember, the NAIS average tenure for an American independent school head is 5 years. And in my statistics, over 80% of independent school heads are fired. They don't leave of their own volition, and most of them are fired in the first 5 years. You need to ensure an adequate budget for a strong leadership team. Ensure that the key partnerships are working. The head and the board, the chair and the head and the chair and the board. We always talk about the board chair head partnership, but the other two are equally as important. That is the chair with the board and the head with every member of the board. You need to conduct an annual board governance training session to ensure that best practices are followed consistently. Help the head build political capital by making the head a good person in the eyes of the stakeholders. There are ways boards can do that. Don't fire the head multiple times. What that really means is when a board allows undercutting or actually does the undercutting of the head without necessarily meaning to signal a formal lack of support, but every time a board does that, the head is in effect in some ways fired. Stay strategic and follow the principles of good practice that NAIS espouses. Ensure the school has a committed and courageous chair. Boy, when the time gets tough, you want a committed and courageous chair who will be a bulwark to support the head and help take some of the arrows which are just naturally flowing toward the CEO of independent schools. And the board should remember that the head is the board's only employee. The board needs to know his or her mental health and happiness in the position. Okay. So we have about a half an hour. I'm going to see what questions there may be, and then we're going to discuss a case. We'll probably use breakout rooms for the case because of the number of people online. It's called the Blaine School case, and it's a case of a school currently undergoing the situation that is described. But first, let me see, do we have any questions? Either you want to put in the chat or raise your hand or come off the microphone and just go ahead and ask your question, if you have a question. I'd be amazed if nobody has a question. Barbara Stanley, do you have any questions? Or comments? Barbara, you're on mute.
Trying to unmute, yes. You know, you talked about sabbaticals for heads. Do you have any thoughts about sabbaticals for faculty?
Sure. Most independent schools have exactly the same rules for administrators as they do for teachers. It's usually 7 or 8 years, and you can apply for a sabbatical. If the school has a major endowment capacity, these sabbaticals can often be full pay for a half year or full year. If money is an issue, they may either be a full year at half pay or a half year at full pay. It's always more expensive to do a half year at full pay for the school, but I would say the same policy that would exist for any administrator is the one that would exist for any member of the faculty. Thanks for asking that. Stacy Clay. Hey, Stacy. Any comments or questions?
Hi, John. My comment would be that was a wonderful presentation, and I think thank you for sharing all of that. I guess my question would be any advice if a head finds themselves in a situation where they can't get the kind of support from their board or their chair to put all of those wonderful practices in place.
Well, Stacy, I know you well, and you're a professional at this yourself. How do you persuade a board to do the right thing when it doesn't come naturally to them? I don't know. I'm going to tell you 2 quick stories. I've got a board chair. I'm actually going to tell you her name. Her name is Gail Tien. She's the head of a school in Vietnam. She's the board chair of the school in Vietnam. Some years ago, she hired me to benchmark the compensation of the head of school at the time. It didn't have a whole committee because it was the school was owned by a corporation, and she represented the corporation as the board chair. We gave him a pretty competitive package. I told her that, and the gentleman who was the head of school, I think, died. It was like 6 to 8 months later of cancer, and I found out later she knew he had cancer, and she wanted to protect his family. And that's why she hired me to do what I did. And she was by his bedside almost every day as much as his wife. How do you find a chair like that? How do you recruit a chair like that? Randy Freiberg, head of the board of graded school in Brazil, when David Tully had cancer. and has had 4 children. And Randy called me and he said, David's going to have to go off to cancer center in Houston. He could be gone a whole year. I want you to do a search for a new head, but not a new head, just an interim head. It's got to be clear to everybody. This is an interim head search. We want David to come back. And then he had the year before, knowing what was going on, hired me to benchmark David's compensation. David called me. He did not come back to the school. He left the Houston Center, and he called me on his way back to England, where he was from. He was going to join my partnership. David Tully was a brilliant man. And he said, John, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 weeks, but I'm heading home. And I just want you to know that I know my sons are taken care of because of Randy. So if I get emotional, it's because I have seen board chairs who do the right thing. I had a board chair of another school. She didn't have a lot of money, but she had love. And at my first year at the school, every single day at my house on campus, I heard the little footsteps of her 2 little children running up to the door, leaving me a gift, a package, a sweater, a box of candy, always with the note, we hope the transition's going well. You mean so much to us. Her name was Gloria. Her name is Gloria. She had heard from somebody that I loved jelly beans, and particularly licorice jelly beans. And I got these most incredibly decorated packages of licorice jelly beans. And this is 30 years ago. And every birthday and every Christmas, I still get from Gloria a beautifully decorated package of licorice jelly beans. I've never had the heart to tell Gloria I hate jelly beans, particularly licorice jelly beans. I would never eat licorice jelly beans, but hopefully Gloria doesn't hear this recording, because I still get them, because she is a nurturer at heart. I'm going to say her name. Her name is Gloria Andujar. And actually, she's changed it. It's Gloria Baker. And Gloria Baker is a nurturer to the world, and certainly was to me. So Stacy, not exactly the answer for everybody, but who you get to have as your chair is such a crucial decision for the board. And I'm going to plug somebody else here. When I worked for Haverford for many years on governance, during the years Joe Cox was there, they had a governance chair who was, I think, for 8 or 10 years, the same governance chair every single year. And not only did he help to make sure the right people joined the board, he helped to make sure every single year that those boards knew the rules of the road. He could pick out exactly which issues were going to be an issue for a particular board member, and made sure when I did my governance workshops that I addressed those issues. That gentleman's name was Bob Clothier, and he still lives in the Philadelphia area. He was a genius at being the Committee on Trustees chair. So if you're lucky enough to get these crucial key people, keep them as long as you can. I happen to believe that don't have short terms for your board members. Don't have short terms for your chairs, because there's an absolute correlation between long-term board members, long-term chairs, and long-term heads. Stacy, great to see you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Libby, any comments or questions before we jump into the case?
There's some questions in the chat too, John.
Yeah, I was just gonna.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah. In terms of evaluation, please clarify the evaluation should not be about style.
Well, I sometimes find that what boards do is at the end of the year, when they're evaluating the head and they go into executive session, they talk about the head. You know, the head is too much this way. You know, he's not outgoing enough, or he or she is not meeting the right people, or they don't interact with the stakeholders in the appropriate manner. It tends to get personal rather than professional, that's focused on the actual goals that were set with the board for the head of school. So what I'm saying about style is don't make it personality based. You've got the personality that you've chosen. You're not going to change someone's basic personality. And by the way, no person is perfect. You know, everybody wants God on a good day in the role of head of school, but you don't have that. So what you do is you build around the head, or he or she builds around themselves, a leadership team of people whose styles are very different and complementary with an E, so that the whole range of talents that a head of school needs are represented by the leadership team. So a really good head evaluation process is not dramatic, it's not bureaucratic, it's not too long, it's simple. It starts with the head support committee coming up with the head with a set of goals, maybe 3 to 5, the board approving those goals, mid-year assessing those goals, and at the end of year, every board member should be filling out a written documentation of how they feel the heads performed against those goals. Then the committee should meet again with the head who has done his or her own self-evaluation against the same goals. And then they talk through, are we on the same page or are we in a different place from each other? And out of that, the chair should be writing a 2-page summary of commendations for work well done, recommendations for work still needing to be done. Read it at the June board meeting, put it in the file. It's really all the IRS requires is the process I've just described. And if you go in much deeper than that, or you get much more bureaucratic and extensive, just remember the head evaluation process can be constructive, but it can also be dangerous if it's not handled properly. Any other chat questions?
Yes. Is there a standard number of years of service before a sabbatical, and has COVID changed that?
I'm glad you didn't ask if there was a standard number of years that a head should serve, because I know there was a consultant some years ago who said 12 years was the number of years a head should serve. And a lot of heads got fired in their 12th year following that. I think for me, it was 8 years, but I think for a long-term head to survive as a long-term head and still remain effective, they need a break. A lot of long-term heads never take a break. Now, sometimes that's control behavior. Most good heads of schools can be control freaks, but I do think heads need that break for their own sanity and the health of their family and the school. So after 8 or 10 years, that's probably the time to have it. Not much later than that. Anything else?
Yeah. One last question. Do you have any thoughts about a bonus in a head's contract?
I think a bonus in a head's contract is a very good idea if the head agrees with the concept. I just saw your cat, Jennifer. That's cool. Nice color. I think a bonus has to be something that both parties agree upon. Are there going to be tight metrics for it? Or is it simply going to be, we like you, we think you did a good job, here's your bonus? The problem with a bonus is if you give it 100% and you don't give it 100% the next year, the head feels dumped on. And is the bonus really just additional base salary, or is it really something that relates to specific outcomes? I would say today, as much as 40 to 50% of heads have some sort of bonus that is related to metrics of some kind. Okay, so let's do the case before we run out of time. Jennifer's going to send you out randomly, I think, in a groups of about 8, but I want to read the case to you aloud. This is going on currently. The head of the Blaine School, which is a K-8 school in the Southeast, has been there for over 25 years. George is literally the face of the school to the world. He took a 6-month sabbatical in his 15th year, but has had no break since. The board decides to offer him an extension of an additional year beyond the current 3-year contract, which is now ending. However, some board members wonder if he's getting tired or preparing to leave. They know he wants to spend more time with his grandchildren who live elsewhere. Replacing George obviously will be a major challenge, but there's a potential successor internally. There's also a major capital campaign underway, and it will not end for 3 more years. When offered the 1-year extension to his contract, George appears to be hurt. He thought he would be offered a 2 or 3-year extension to allow him to continue fundraising for the capital campaign. Then he would plan to retire. George asks the board if he may have a second 6-month sabbatical, which according to his contract he has a right to, and allow the assistant head to be the acting head for that 6 months. He would then like to return for 2 more years to conclude the campaign. The compensation committee of the board is not sure. Clearly, George's reaction has caught them off guard. Why were they pushing him to leave? Should they let him take the sabbatical? Or should they pay him cash in lieu of the sabbatical and stay with only the 1-year extension? This is going on right now. Just change the name of the school. I'd like to know what would be the best practice in this situation for both the school and for George. That's the question. So let's send people out. You're going to have probably not more than 10 or 15 minutes. Let's see if you can come to some helpful insights.
And folks, I put the case in the chat if you would like to refer to it. It's a Google Doc. You should be able to open that up. And you said 15 minutes, John?
Yep, let's do 15 minutes.
All right. I'm going to send folks out now.
Okay. All right, everybody. So what I'd like to do is to just very quickly get some comments from each group. Linda, just you really quickly, can you give me some assessment from your group?
Yes, basically, we thought that if George's performance was satisfactory, give him the 6-month sabbatical, because that's what he asked for, and that would help with the continuity, also the 2-year extension during the capital campaign. We felt the capital campaign really was important to keep continuity with the head, keep him engaged, et cetera. The thing that we really felt, though, was that the board and the head of school need to be talking. There felt like there was a lot of miscommunication, or nobody was sure, and that it would help if they all talked.
Okay, thank you. Jim, right, what about the group you were in? What was the sentiment there? You're on mute, Jim.
Thanks. Mark Brahani was going to speak for us.
Yeah, I'm happy to offer our thoughts. Picking up on the previous comments, we were really scratching our heads about how the situation got to this point. We felt that the board chair and the head just couldn't have been communicating effectively. The whole board should have been understanding, a game plan for the school as it has embarked on a capital campaign, and have figured out what the heads, longer term plans were, instead of getting to the 11th hour to have to figure out how to talk to each other. We were just confused about how there could be so much lack of clarity around the head's relationship with the school. But that said, in our group, we came up with a thought, and it wasn't my thought, but others came up with the thought that this go for the head's proposal, but turn the sabbatical into a focused involvement with the capital campaign that would give the head a very different kind of set of activities to do for 6 months that might, we thought, be rejuvenating on some level, and then have him come back for 2 years, and that would give the school time to then figure out if this supposed second in command was suitable for taking on the headship, or shouldn't they maybe consider a head search?
Okay.
So that's where we got. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Really quickly, Paul, I'm not sure if you could speak for the group you were in. Okay, real quickly.
Well, I'll try. I think, again, it was communication is key. I think we also wanted to know a little bit more about how it got to this point, and maybe there's more.
That's the great thing about a case study. You don't get to know it all.
Yeah, I know more of a backstory, but I think we felt like we kept coming back to the theme of communication, the relationship between the board chair and the head, because we saw strategic interest in at least reaching some type of compromise, and we were wondering why that conversation maybe hadn't happened in a way so the head wasn't completely surprised. And I hope I got that right.
Okay, thanks. Kathy Dawson, what group were you in? Were you in a different one or that group?
I was in that group.
Who else was in another group that I haven't called on yet that could speak for your group real quick, because we're going to run out of time here? Anybody else?
Our group, this is Don. Our group also really stressed communication, or the lack of communication is an issue. Assumptions that were made, which apparently were incorrect assumptions, and a lack of being attuned to planning for transitions to the end of the campaign, traditions for new leadership of the school, enabling George to be able to separate himself from the school after a quarter of a century of service.
Good. Okay, one more comment. Francis Sayers, you made a good point, and I think it's one that you should state. It'll be our final comment today. Would you comment what you were pointing up?
Could the first comment or the second comment? You're honestly going to have to.
Well, when you were talking about the awkwardness of this.
I think a lot of it has to go to the miscommunication that is happening between both, but also the awkwardness of the timing. I'm not sure if I'm hitting the point that you were talking about, but there's real value in having a head of school stay through, I think, a major fundraising campaign, and not a lot of value, I think, in bringing in someone new and unfamiliar.
So I think the
there
other
was something else too, and I can't remember.
Well, you had also made the comment that this conversation can be an awkward one between the chair and the
Oh,
head.
yes, that.
If you're a sitting head of school and you're already captured, you're a part of the system, it can be embarrassing, awkward, difficult to be your own advocate. And you know something I found in my years working with boards, the closer the head of school and the board chair are as friends, the more difficult is this conversation. You might be interested to know that the chair of this board and the head are actually close. They're actually fairly good friends, but they don't talk honestly about this issue because it's awkward. So this is not a distant, awkward relationship in terms of lacking cordiality or understanding. They've known each other for years. It's just that it's gotten so intimate, they're reluctant to tell the truth to each other, whatever the truth may actually be. So I'll just tell you where this ended up in the last couple of days that I've heard is the board was shocked that he wanted to stay 2 more years. They were thrilled to have him stay 2 more years. They've agreed to the 6-month sabbatical. They don't want to give him the money for the 6 months. They think he needs to go away for 6 months. They want the internal candidate to run as the school as an acting head. Then they want him to stay 2 more years to finish the capital campaign. And then they can decide whether or not they launch a search for an outside head or whether the internal candidate did a good enough job during that 6 months to actually be a shoo-in for that role. So that's kind of where they're going to end up, I think. But the misunderstanding that they had about the whole thing just blew both sides away. So thank you, everybody. We've come to the end. I believe we have to end on time. So thank you very, very much. Thank you, Yanni and Jennifer and Dina, and thank all of you for your participation. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you too, John. Have a great weekend. The next time is March 10th. It's in the chat. And for those of you who are Eagles fans, go Birds.
Go
And even
Eagles.
if you're not, go Birds. All right. Have a good weekend, all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.